The dust rose in golden clouds around Willa Lancaster's boots as she swung her lasso with practiced precision, the rope singing through the hot Montana air before settling perfectly around the young steer's neck. It was August 1883, and the sun beat down mercilessly on the rangeland just outside Dillon, where her father's cattle had scattered during last night's thunderstorm. She'd been out here since dawn, working alone to gather the herd back together, her chestnut mare dancing beneath her as she kept the rope taut. Willa pulled her wide-brimmed hat lower over her eyes, squinting against the glare as she guided the steer back toward the makeshift pen she'd constructed from fallen timber and rope. At 22 years old, she'd spent most of her life on this ranch, learning everything her father could teach her about working cattle. Her mother had died when she was just 8, leaving her to grow up among cowboys and cattle drives, learning to rope and ride before most girls her age had learned to properly embroider. The steer fought against the rope, but Willa held firm, her strong arms steady as she maneuvered him into position. She'd already rounded up 6 head this morning, and by her count, there were at least a dozen more scattered across the valley. Her father, Thomas Lancaster, had thrown his back out 2 days ago trying to move a fallen tree, leaving him bedridden and frustrated. Her younger brother James was only 15 and had been sent to Bozeman to pick up supplies, which meant the responsibility of gathering the scattered herd fell squarely on her shoulders. She didn't mind. In fact, she preferred it this way. Out here on the open range, with just the wind and the cattle and the endless sky, she felt more herself than she ever did in town, where the other women looked at her with a mixture of pity and disapproval. They couldn't understand why she wasn't married yet, why she wore men's trousers and spent her days covered in dust and sweat instead of sitting in a parlor learning to play piano. Willa was securing the steer when she heard the sound of hooves approaching from the east. She turned in her saddle, one hand instinctively moving to the rifle strapped to her horse, then relaxed slightly when she saw it was just one rider. A stranger by the looks of him, sitting tall on a paint horse, his silhouette dark against the bright morning sun. The rider approached slowly, his hands visible on the reins, clearly showing he meant no harm. As he drew closer, Willa could make out more details. He was young, probably not much older than she was, with dark hair that curled slightly beneath his worn Stetson. His face was tanned and weathered from long days in the sun, and he had the easy posture of someone who'd spent most of his life in the saddle. His clothes were dusty from travel, but his horse was well kept, and there was a quiet competence in the way he moved. "Morning," he called out when he was close enough to be heard without shouting. His voice was deep and pleasant, with a slight drawl that spoke of time spent further south. "Saw you working from the ridge. Looks like you've got your hands full." Willa studied him carefully, her green eyes assessing. Strangers weren't uncommon in Montana territory, but you had to be careful. Still, there was something open and honest in his face that made her relax her guard just a fraction. "Storm scattered our herd last night, just gathering them back up." The cowboy nodded, looking out over the valley where several more cattle could be seen grazing in the distance. "That's a lot of ground to cover alone." He paused, then looked back at her with a slight smile. "Name's Daniel Baker. I've been riding through looking for work. Ranch hand, cattle driver, whatever needs doing. I'm good with a rope and better with horses." "Willa Lancaster," she replied, still cautious. "This is my father's ranch, the Double L, about 3 miles west of here." Daniel nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving hers. There was something in his gaze that made her heart beat just a little faster, though she couldn't quite say why. Maybe it was the way he looked at her as an equal, not with the dismissive glance most men gave her, or the curious stares she got in town. He was looking at her the way one ranch hand might look at another, with respect and interest. "I could help you round up the rest," he offered, gesturing toward the scattered cattle. "No charge, just being neighborly. Then if your father's looking for an extra hand, I'd be grateful for the consideration." Willa hesitated. Her father always told her to be careful around strangers, but they desperately needed help, especially with him laid up. She looked at Daniel again, noting the honest set of his jaw, the calluses on his hands that spoke of hard work, and the way his horse stood calmly beneath him, well trained and content. A man's horse could tell you a lot about him, her father always said. "All right," she said finally. "Help me gather the rest of these strays and we'll see about that job." She pointed toward the north. "There's a group of 3 over by that copse of cottonwoods. You take those and I'll work on the pair near the creek." Daniel's smile widened. "Yes, madam." He tipped his hat and turned his horse in the direction she'd indicated, uncoiling his lasso as he rode. Willa watched him for just a moment, noting the fluid way he moved with his horse, before shaking her head and turning her own mount toward the creek. She had work to do, and there was no time for getting distracted by a handsome stranger with kind eyes. They worked in companionable silence for the next hour, moving across the valley with practiced efficiency. Willa found herself impressed despite her initial wariness. Daniel knew what he was doing, that much was clear. His rope work was clean and precise, and he had a way with the cattle that suggested years of experience. He didn't crowd them or rush them, just gently guided them where they needed to go. By the time the sun reached its zenith, they'd gathered all but 2 of the scattered herd. Those last 2 were way up on the ridge, nearly half a mile away, and looked to be stubborn about coming down. "Looks like those 2 want to make us work for it," Daniel said, riding up beside her. He pulled out a canteen and took a long drink before offering it to her. Willa accepted it with a nod of thanks, suddenly aware of how parched she was. The water was warm but welcome. "They're always the difficult ones," she agreed, handing back the canteen. "But we can't leave them up there. That's where the wolves hunt." "Then let's go get them," Daniel said simply. "Lead the way." They rode up the ridge together, their horses picking their way carefully over the rocky ground. The higher they climbed, the more Willa became aware of the man beside her. There was something comfortable about his presence, something that felt right in a way she couldn't quite explain. She'd worked alongside ranch hands before, but there had always been an awkwardness to it, as if the men didn't quite know what to make of her. Daniel seemed perfectly at ease, treating her like a partner rather than an oddity. "Where are you from?" she asked as they rode, surprising herself with the question. She wasn't usually one for small talk. "Texas originally," Daniel replied. "San Antonio. But I've been drifting for a few years now. Worked on ranches in Colorado, Wyoming, spent some time in South Dakota, just seeing the country, learning what I can." "Why Montana?" He was quiet for a moment, his eyes on the horizon. "Heard there was good ranching country up here. Wide open spaces, plenty of opportunity for a man willing to work hard. And I guess I was tired of drifting. Started thinking it might be time to settle somewhere." Willa nodded, understanding that sentiment more than she'd expected to. "Montana's beautiful, but it's hard country. Winters are brutal, and making a living off the land takes everything you've got." "I'm not afraid of hard work," Daniel said, and there was a quiet confidence in his voice that made her believe him. "And I've seen enough of easy living to know it's not for me. I'd rather break my back doing something that matters than spend my life comfortable and useless." They reached the 2 wayward cattle, who were indeed proving stubborn. It took both of them working in tandem to finally get ropes on the animals and convince them to head back down the ridge. By the time they made it back to the makeshift pen with the rest of the herd, Willa's arms were aching, and her shirt was soaked through with sweat. "We make a good team," Daniel said as they secured the last of the cattle. He was looking at her with that same open expression, but now there was something more in it, something warm that made her stomach flutter. "We do," Willa agreed, perhaps more quietly than she'd intended. She cleared her throat and straightened up, trying to ignore the way her heart was racing. "Come on back to the house. You can meet my father and we'll see about getting you that job. Plus, you've earned a hot meal at the very least." The ride back to the main ranch house was peaceful, with the herd following docilely behind them. The double L spread out before them as they crested the final hill, the main house standing sturdy and proud against the Montana landscape. It wasn't grand, but it was solid, built by her grandfather 40 years ago when he'd first claimed this land. The barn was large and well-maintained, and several other outbuildings dotted the property. Thomas Lancaster was on the porch when they arrived, despite doctors' orders to stay in bed. He was leaning heavily on a cane, his weathered face creased with worry that cleared slightly when he saw Willa riding up safe with the herd behind her. "Willa girl, I was getting worried," he called out. His eyes moved to Daniel, assessing and cautious. "Who's this?" "Daniel Baker, sir," Daniel said, dismounting and walking forward with his hand extended. "I came across your daughter gathering your herd and offered to help. I'm looking for work if you're hiring." Thomas shook his hand, his grip firm despite his injury. Willa knew her father was taking Daniel's measure, noting the same thing she had earlier. "That's so. Well, any man who helps my daughter without being asked has some character to him. Come on inside, both of you. Let's talk." The interior of the house was cool and dim after the bright sunlight. Willa excused herself to wash up, leaving the men to talk in the sitting room. She could hear the low murmur of their voices as she changed out of her dusty clothes and into a clean dress. It felt strange, putting on something feminine after a long day in the saddle, but she knew her father would expect it for dinner. When she came back downstairs, she found Daniel and her father deep in conversation about cattle breeds and grass management. Daniel had his hat in his hands, turning it slowly as he spoke, and there was an animation in his face that hadn't been there before. He clearly loved this work, she realized. It wasn't just a job to him. "Willa," her father said when he noticed her in the doorway, "I've offered Daniel the position of ranch foreman. We've been needing someone to help manage things, especially with me getting older and James still learning. What do you think?" Willa was surprised by the question. Her father had always valued her opinion, but to ask it so directly in front of a stranger was unusual. She looked at Daniel, who was watching her with those steady brown eyes, waiting for her judgment. "I think anyone who can rope like he does and isn't afraid of hard work would be a good addition to the double L," she said honestly. "And we do need the help." Daniel's face broke into a genuine smile. "Thank you, Miss Lancaster. I promise you won't regret it." "It's Willa," she corrected, feeling heat rise to her cheeks. "If you're going to be working here, we might as well be on familiar terms." "Willa then," Daniel said, and the way he said her name made something warm bloom in her chest. They had dinner together that evening, a simple but hearty meal of beef stew and fresh bread. Daniel proved to be good company, sharing stories from his travels that had even Thomas laughing. He talked about the time he'd helped drive a herd through a blizzard in Wyoming, and the ranch in Colorado where he'd learned to break horses from an old Shoshone man who taught him to understand the animal's language. Willa found herself hanging on his every word, fascinated not just by what he'd done, but by the way he told it. He had a gift for painting pictures with his words, making her see the places he'd been and feel the adventures he'd had. And yet, there was no boasting in it, no arrogance. He spoke like a man sharing his experiences with friends, humble and genuine. After dinner, Thomas retired to bed, his back clearly paining him. Willa walked Daniel out to the barn, where he'd be sleeping in the small room they kept for hired hands. The evening air was cool and pleasant, filled with the chirping of crickets and the distant call of a night bird. "Thank you for helping me today," Willa said as they stood outside the barn door. The moon was rising, painting everything in silver light. "You didn't have to, and you probably saved me another full day's work." "It was my pleasure," Daniel said softly. He was standing close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes. "Truth is, I haven't enjoyed a day's work that much in a long time." "You're something special, Willa Lancaster. The way you handle cattle, the way you ride. I've worked with a lot of cowboys in my time, and you're as good as any of them, better than most." Willa felt her breath catch. No one had ever spoken to her like that before, with such simple, honest admiration. "I had a good teacher," she managed to say. "My father taught me everything." "He taught you the skills," Daniel agreed. "But the heart, the natural talent, that's all you." He paused, seeming to struggle with something, then continued. "When I rode up this morning and saw you out there, roping cattle all alone, fearless and capable, I thought to myself, now there's someone worth knowing, someone worth staying for." Her heart was pounding so hard she was sure he must be able to hear it. "You just met me this morning." "I know," Daniel said, and there was wonder in his voice. "And I know it's crazy to feel this way so fast. But out there today, working with you, it felt right in a way nothing has felt right in years. Like I'd been searching for something without knowing what it was, and suddenly there you were." He took a breath, his eyes never leaving hers. "What I'm trying to say, and doing a poor job of it, is that I'd like to get to know you better, Willa. Not just as my employer's daughter, but as you, if you'd be willing." Willa knew she should be cautious. She barely knew this man. But standing here in the moonlight, looking into his honest eyes, she felt something she'd never felt before. A connection, immediate and undeniable, like recognizing someone she'd known in another life. "I'd like that," she said quietly. "I'd like that very much." Daniel's smile was radiant. "Then let's wrangle life together," he said. "Starting tomorrow and every day after, if you'll have me." The words settled over them like a promise, and Willa felt something shift in her chest, something fundamental and profound. This was the beginning of something, she could feel it. Something important. "Let's wrangle life together," she repeated, and the words felt like coming home. The weeks that followed were the happiest Willa could remember in a long time. Daniel proved to be everything he'd promised and more. He worked from dawn until dusk, helping repair fences, breaking horses, and managing the herd. Thomas's back slowly healed, and he spent his days teaching Daniel the specifics of the Double L operation, clearly impressed by the younger man's quick mind and tireless work ethic. But it was the time Willa spent working alongside Daniel that she treasured most. Every morning, they'd ride out together to check on the cattle, and their conversations ranged from the practical matters of ranch management to deeper subjects. Daniel told her about losing his own parents young, his mother to fever and his father to a riding accident, and how he'd spent his teenage years bouncing between relatives who didn't quite know what to do with him. "That's why I started drifting," he explained one morning as they sat on their horses overlooking the herd. "Never felt like I belonged anywhere. Every place I stayed felt temporary, like I was just passing through someone else's life." "And now?" Willa asked, though she thought she knew the answer from the way he looked at her. "Now I think I might have found where I belong," Daniel said quietly. He reached out and took her hand, his calloused fingers warm against hers. "If you'll let me stay." "I want you to stay," Willa said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't want you to drift anymore." They'd been courting properly by then, with Daniel asking Thomas's permission like a gentleman, despite the fact that Willa was a grown woman who made her own decisions. Thomas had given his blessing readily. Seeing how happy his daughter was, how she smiled more and laughed easier than she had in years. The ranch hands who'd been there longer accepted Daniel quickly, respecting his knowledge and his willingness to take on any task, no matter how difficult or unpleasant. He never asked anyone to do something he wouldn't do himself, and he had a way of making even the hardest work feel companionable with his easy humor and steady presence. But there were challenges, too. In late September, a group of cattle rustlers tried to make off with part of their herd in the night. Daniel and Willa rode out together when they heard the commotion, and they managed to chase off the thieves with warning shots and determination. Thomas wanted to go after them, but Daniel convinced him it was better to let them go rather than risk anyone getting hurt. "We got the cattle back, and that's what matters," Daniel said firmly. "Going after them would just be pride, and pride gets people killed." It was wisdom beyond his years, and Thomas respected him more for it. Willa found herself falling harder with each passing day, admiring not just Daniel's physical capabilities, but his character, his judgment, the kindness he showed to everyone from her father to the youngest ranch hand. They stole moments alone when they could. Sometimes it was riding out to check a far fence line and stopping to share a lunch by a creek, talking and laughing as the water burbled over stones. Other times it was evenings on the porch after dinner, sitting close together and watching the sun paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. One evening in early October, when the air had turned crisp and the aspen leaves were turning gold on the mountainsides, Daniel asked her to take a walk with him. They strolled away from the house, out toward the meadow where wildflowers still bloomed despite the approaching winter. "I need to tell you something," Daniel said, and there was a nervousness in his voice that Willa had never heard before. "I've been saving my wages since I got here, adding to what I'd saved from other jobs. It's not much, but it's enough to start thinking about the future." "What kind of future?" Willa asked, though her heart was already racing with hope. Daniel stopped walking and turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. The setting sun painted him in warm light, highlighting the earnest expression on his face. "The kind where I don't go back to sleeping in the barn. The kind where I wake up every morning next to you and fall asleep every night with you in my arms. The kind where we build something together, not just a ranch but a family, a life, everything that matters." He dropped to one knee, still holding her hands, and Willa felt tears spring to her eyes. "Willa Lancaster, I know we haven't known each other long, just a couple of months, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life than I am of this. I love you. I love your strength and your kindness and your laugh. I love the way you sit a horse and the way you're not afraid of hard work. I love talking to you and being silent with you and just existing in the same space as you. You make me want to be better, to build something lasting, to finally stop drifting and put down roots." He took a shaky breath. "I don't have a fancy ring yet, but I promise I'll get you one. Will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life being your partner in ranching and in everything else?" Willa was crying openly now, but they were happy tears. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking. "Yes, Daniel, of course yes. I don't need a fancy ring, I just need you." Daniel stood and pulled her into his arms, kissing her with all the passion and tenderness that had been building between them for weeks. It was Willa's first real kiss, and it was everything she'd imagined and more. She felt safe and cherished and desired all at once, felt the promise of their future together in the way his arms held her close. When they finally broke apart, both breathless and grinning like fools, Daniel rested his forehead against hers. "I'm going to make you happy, Willa. That's my promise to you. Every single day for the rest of our lives, I'm going to work to make you happy." "You already do," she whispered. "You already do." They walked back to the house hand in hand, and when they told Thomas, his weathered face split into a huge smile. "Well, it's about time," he said, pulling them both into a hug. "I was wondering when you'd get around to asking, boy. Willa's been looking at you like you hung the moon since the day you arrived." "Father," Willa protested, but she was laughing. "It's true," Thomas said with a shrug. "I haven't seen you this happy since you were a little girl. Daniel, you're a good man, and I'm proud to call you son." They were married in November, just as the first snows began to fall. It was a simple ceremony in the small church in Dillon, with the ranch hands and a few families from neighboring spreads in attendance. Willa wore her mother's wedding dress, which had been carefully preserved in a trunk all these years. It needed only minor alterations, and when she looked at herself in the mirror, she could almost see her mother smiling back at her. Daniel wore a new suit he'd bought in town, looking handsome and slightly uncomfortable in the formal clothes. But when Willa walked down the aisle on her father's arm and saw the expression on Daniel's face, the pure love and awe in his eyes, she felt like the most beautiful woman in the world. The minister spoke about partnership and devotion, about two people joining together to face whatever life brought them. When it came time for the vows, Daniel's voice was strong and clear as he promised to love and cherish her all the days of his life. Willa's own voice shook with emotion as she made the same promises, meaning every word with her whole heart. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Daniel kissed her with such tenderness that several of the women in attendance wiped away tears. It was a kiss that promised everything: love and loyalty, passion and partnership, a lifetime of mornings and evenings and all the moments in between. The celebration afterward was held at the ranch, with tables set up in the barn that had been decorated with pine boughs and autumn leaves. There was music and dancing, food and laughter. Willa danced with her father, with her brother James, who'd returned from Bozeman just in time for the wedding, and most of all with Daniel, who held her close and whispered promises in her ear that made her blush and smile. As the evening wore on and the guests began to depart, Willa and Daniel slipped away to the small house that the ranch hands had helped build for them over the past weeks. It was modest, just 3 rooms, but it was theirs. Daniel carried her over the threshold, both of them laughing, and set her down gently in their new home. "Welcome home, Mrs. Baker," he said softly, and Willa's heart swelled with joy at hearing her new name. "Welcome home, Mr. Baker," she replied. And then there were no more words, just the two of them coming together as husband and wife, expressing their love in the most fundamental way. Their first winter together was hard but joyful. The snows came heavy that year, and there were days when the work was brutal, breaking ice on water troughs and hauling hay to cattle that couldn't reach their usual grazing. But Daniel and Willa faced it together, just as they'd promised, and somehow even the hardest days felt manageable when they could come home to each other at the end of them. Thomas's health continued to improve, and he gradually handed over more and more of the ranch management to Daniel and Willa. He seemed content to step back, secure in the knowledge that the Double L was in good hands. Young James was growing into a capable young man, learning from both Daniel and his sister. As winter gave way to spring, Willa discovered she was pregnant. She told Daniel one evening as they sat on the porch of their little house, watching the sunset paint the snow-capped mountains in shades of purple and gold. "I'm going to have a baby," she said simply, and watched as understanding dawned on Daniel's face. For a moment he just stared at her, his mouth open in shock. Then a grin spread across his face, so wide and bright that it made her laugh. "A baby! We're going to have a baby!" "Yes," Willa confirmed, and then she was in his arms, being spun around as he whooped with joy. "I'm going to be a father," he kept saying, wonder in his voice. "We're going to be parents. Willa, this is the most incredible thing. Are you happy? Are you feeling all right? Do you need anything? Should you be standing? Maybe you should sit down." Willa laughed at his sudden overprotectiveness. "I'm fine, Daniel. Women have been having babies forever. I'm strong and I'll be fine." But Daniel fussed over her anyway, which she secretly loved. He insisted on taking over the heavier chores, wouldn't let her work too hard, made sure she ate plenty and rested often. Thomas was over the moon at the news of becoming a grandfather, and even James seemed excited about becoming an uncle. The summer of 1884 was beautiful, warm and green with plenty of rain to keep the grasslands lush. The cattle thrived, and so did Willa, despite the discomforts of pregnancy. Daniel was attentive and loving, talking to her growing belly and feeling for the baby's kicks with wonder on his face. In September, as the leaves began to turn once more, Willa went into labor. It was long and difficult, and there were moments when Daniel paced outside the room, nearly mad with worry. But finally, in the early hours of the morning, a baby's cry rang out, strong and healthy. Daniel rushed into the room to find Willa exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in soft blankets. "It's a boy," she said softly, tears of joy on her face. "We have a son." Daniel approached slowly, almost reverently, and looked down at the tiny face of his firstborn. The baby had dark hair like his father and was staring up at them with eyes that would eventually turn the same green as his mother's. "He's perfect," Daniel whispered, gently touching one tiny hand which immediately gripped his finger. "Willa, he's absolutely perfect. What should we name him?" Willa asked, though she already had an idea. "Thomas," Daniel said without hesitation. "After your father, if that's all right with you. He gave me a home when I was drifting, trusted me with his daughter, gave me a family. I'd be honored to name our son after him." Willa smiled through her tears. "Thomas Daniel Baker. It's perfect." When they told Thomas about the baby's name, the old rancher cried, which was something Willa had never seen her father do. He held his grandson with such tenderness, such love, that it made her heart ache in the best way. The years that followed were full of the kind of happiness Willa had never imagined possible. Little Thomas grew into a sturdy, adventurous toddler who loved following his father around the ranch. Daniel proved to be a wonderful father, patient and playful, teaching his son about horses and cattle with the same gentle competence he brought to everything. In 1886, Willa gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl they named William and Grace. The house suddenly felt very small and very loud, but neither Willa nor Daniel would have changed it for anything. They added on to their home, building more rooms to accommodate their growing family. Thomas Lancaster passed away peacefully in his sleep in the winter of 1887, just a few months after Grace and William's first birthday. It was a profound loss, but there was comfort in knowing he'd spent his final years surrounded by love, watching his grandchildren play and seeing his ranch thrive under Daniel and Willa's management. James, now 20, took on more responsibilities, proving himself a capable rancher in his own right. He and Daniel worked well together, and the Double L continued to prosper. They acquired more land, built up the herd, and earned a reputation throughout Montana for quality cattle and honest dealing. But the true measure of Willa and Daniel's happiness wasn't in acres or cattle or money. It was in the small moments. It was Daniel coming in from a long day and immediately seeking out Willa for a kiss, even after years of marriage. It was Willa watching her husband teach their children to rope, seeing the patience and love in every interaction. It was quiet evenings on the porch after the children were asleep, sitting close together and talking about everything and nothing. "Do you ever regret it?" Willa asked one such evening in the summer of 1890. They'd been married nearly 6 years now, and she was pregnant again, though they hadn't told the children yet. "Settling down here, giving up your wandering?" Daniel turned to look at her, his expression soft in the fading light. "Not once, not for a single moment. Everything I wandered looking for, I found here with you. Purpose, belonging, family, love. You're my home, Willa. You always have been, from that first morning when I saw you roping cattle alone and knew my drifting days were over." "Let's wrangle life together," Willa said softly, repeating the words he'd said to her that first day. "Every day for the rest of our lives," Daniel agreed, pulling her close. "And then some." Their fourth child, a daughter they named Sarah, was born that winter. She had Daniel's brown eyes and Willa's determination, and from her earliest days, she showed the same love for horses that her parents shared. As the years passed, and the new century approached, the Baker family became a fixture in Dillon. Their children grew strong and capable, learning to work the ranch and value hard work. Young Thomas showed a talent for horse breeding, while William was fascinated by the business side of ranching. Grace proved to be an accomplished rider, and Sarah had a gift for gentle-hearted stubbornness that reminded everyone of her mother. Daniel and Willa grew older together, their love deepening with each passing year. They faced hardships, droughts and harsh winters, and the inevitable challenges that came with raising children and running a ranch. But they faced everything together, just as they'd promised, partners in every sense of the word. In 1895, young Thomas, now 11 years old, asked his parents how they'd fallen in love. They were all gathered around the dinner table, and the question brought a smile to both Willa and Daniel's faces. "Your mother was roping cattle all alone," Daniel said, reaching across the table to take Willa's hand. "And I rode up and fell in love with the strongest, most capable woman I'd ever seen." "Your father looked at me like an equal," Willa added, squeezing his hand. "Like a partner. And he asked if we could wrangle life together." "What does that mean?" Grace asked, her young face curious. "Wrangle life together. It means facing everything life throws at you side by side," Daniel explained. "The good days and the hard days, the joys and the sorrows. It means being partners, not just in work but in everything. It means choosing each other every day no matter what." "Will I find someone to wrangle life with?" William asked. "If you're lucky," Willa said, looking at her son with love. "If you're very, very lucky, you'll find someone who makes you want to stop running and start building. Someone who makes you better just by being near them. Someone who feels like home. Like Papa does for you," Sarah asked innocently. "Exactly like that," Willa confirmed, her eyes meeting Daniel's across the table, full of all the love and devotion that had only grown stronger over the years. That night, after the children were asleep, Willa and Daniel stood outside their home, now significantly larger than the modest 3 rooms they'd started with. The Montana sky was brilliant with stars, and the air was crisp and clean. "Thank you," Willa said quietly. "For what?" Daniel asked, pulling her close. "For seeing me that day, for stopping to help, for asking me to wrangle life with you, for every day since then. For building this life with me, for our children, for everything." Daniel kissed her forehead, then her cheek, then her lips, gentle and loving. "I should be thanking you. You took in a drifting cowboy with nothing but a horse and a dream. You gave me a home, a family, a purpose. You gave me everything that matters." "We gave it to each other," Willa corrected. "That's what partnership means." They stood there under the stars, holding each other, two people who'd found in each other exactly what they'd been searching for. The ranch stretched out around them, the land they'd worked together, the legacy they were building for their children. Inside the house, those children slept safe and warm, loved beyond measure. The years continued to pass, bringing with them both challenges and triumphs. The Double L became one of the most respected ranches in Montana, known for quality cattle and ethical practices. Daniel's reputation as a fair and knowledgeable rancher spread, and young men came from all over hoping to learn from him, just as he'd once sought to learn. But Daniel and Willa never forgot where they'd started, never lost sight of what truly mattered. They raised their children to value hard work and honesty, to treat everyone with respect regardless of station, to understand that true wealth was measured in family and love rather than money or land. As the 20th century dawned, Thomas Jr. was 16 and increasingly involved in the ranch management. William was 14 and showing a keen business mind, already talking about ways to expand and improve. Grace, at 12, was the best rider of any of them, fearless and skilled. Sarah, the baby at 10, had a tender heart and a way with animals that was almost magical. James married a schoolteacher named Elizabeth in 1898, and they built a house on the far side of the property, starting their own family. The ranch was truly becoming a family operation, with multiple generations working together toward common goals. In the summer of 1900, Willa and Daniel celebrated their 15th wedding anniversary with a big party. Friends and neighbors came from miles around, and there was music and dancing and more food than anyone could possibly eat. The children performed a play they'd written about how their parents met, with young Thomas playing his father and Grace playing her mother, lassoing a footstool that stood in for cattle. "Not quite how I remember it," Willa whispered to Daniel as they watched, both of them laughing. "I don't know, I think they captured your fierce independence quite well," Daniel teased, earning him a playful swat on the arm. When it came time for toasts, James stood up, now a man of 32 with a wife and 2 children of his own. "To Daniel and Willa," he said, raising his glass, "who showed me what real partnership looks like, who built something beautiful out of hard work and love, who have made the Double L not just a successful ranch but a real home. May you have many more years of happiness together." "Hear, hear." The crowd chorused, and Willa felt tears prick her eyes at the love and warmth in the room. Later that evening, when the guests had gone home and the children were asleep, Willa and Daniel walked out to the spot where he'd proposed all those years ago. The meadow was bright with summer wildflowers, just as it had been then. 15 years, Willa marveled. "It feels like yesterday and forever ago all at once." "Best 15 years of my life," Daniel said, pulling her into his arms. "Though I have to say, you get more beautiful every year." "How is that possible?" Willa laughed, shaking her head. "You're biased." "Absolutely," Daniel agreed readily. "Hopelessly, completely biased, and I wouldn't have it any other way." He grew more serious, cupping her face in his hands. "I meant what I said that day, Willa. About wrangling life together. Every challenge we've faced, every joy we've shared, has only made me more certain that you're my partner in every way that matters. I love you more today than I did the day we married, and I'll love you even more tomorrow." "I love you too," Willa said, her voice thick with emotion. "So much that sometimes I can't find the words for it. You're the best thing that ever happened to me, Daniel Baker. The very best." They kissed under the stars, just as they had so many times before, and it felt both familiar and new, comfortable and exciting, a perfect encapsulation of what their marriage had become. The first decade of the new century brought more changes. Thomas Jr. met and fell in love with a young woman named Catherine, the daughter of a neighboring rancher. They married when he was 21, and she proved to be as capable and hardworking as Thomas himself. Daniel and Willa gained 2 more grandchildren in quick succession, and the ranch house rang with the laughter of a new generation. William decided to go east to study business at a university in Chicago, a decision that was hard but that his parents supported wholeheartedly. Grace surprised everyone by announcing she wanted to be a veterinarian, one of the few fields opening up to women. She began apprenticing with the local animal doctor, showing the same determination her mother had always possessed. Sarah remained on the ranch, developing her gift with horses into a real talent. By the time she was 16, people were bringing horses from all over Montana for her to train, recognizing something special in her ability to understand and communicate with the animals. Through it all, Willa and Daniel remained the heart of the family, the steady center around which everything else revolved. They were in their early 40s now, still strong and capable, though Daniel's hair was starting to show silver at the temples and Willa had laugh lines around her eyes from years of smiling. They still worked together every day, still stole moments alone when they could, still looked at each other with the same love and desire they'd felt from the beginning. If anything, time had only strengthened their bond, each shared experience adding another layer to the foundation of their partnership. "I was thinking," Daniel said one evening in 1907 as they sat on their porch watching the sunset, "about how different my life would have been if I'd ridden past that morning instead of stopping." "Don't," Willa said immediately, reaching for his hand. "I can't even imagine it." "Neither can I," Daniel admitted. "It's terrifying to think how easily we might have missed each other. If I'd taken a different route, if I'd been a day later or a day earlier, if I'd decided not to stop when I saw you working." "But you did stop," Willa pointed out. "You saw someone who needed help and you stopped. That's who you are, Daniel. That's part of why I fell in love with you." "And you said yes when I asked to help," Daniel countered. "You could have sent me on my way, but you took a chance on a stranger. That's who you are." Willa smiled. "I guess we were meant to find each other. Some things are just meant to be." "Destiny," Daniel mused. "I never believed in it before I met you. Now I can't imagine any other explanation. There were too many chances for us to miss each other, too many ways our paths could have diverged. But they didn't. We found each other against all the odds and we built this incredible life together." "We did," Willa agreed, leaning her head on his shoulder. "And we're not done yet. We have so much more life to wrangle together." Daniel laughed, the sound warm and content. "Indeed we do, Mrs. Baker. Indeed we do." As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and red, they sat together in comfortable silence. Two people who'd taken a chance on each other 24 years ago and had never looked back. Their hands were intertwined, their hearts beat in sync, and the ranch they'd built together spread out before them, tangible proof of what love and partnership could create. Inside the house, they could hear Sarah playing piano, a skill she'd recently taken up. The melody drifted out into the evening air, sweet and clear. Further away, they could see the lights in Thomas and Catherine's house, where their grandchildren were probably getting ready for bed. James and Elizabeth's house showed lights too, and smoke rose from their chimney. "We did good," Willa said softly. "Look at what we built, Daniel, not just the ranch, but this, family, love, belonging. We created a place where everyone knows their home." "We did it together," Daniel emphasized. "Every step of the way together. That's the secret, I think. Not just finding the right person, but working together day after day, building something brick by brick. Most people give up when things get hard. We never did. We never will," Willa promised. The years continued their steady march forward. In 1910, William returned from Chicago with a degree in business, and a new wife, a smart and ambitious woman named Helen. He brought fresh ideas and modern techniques to the ranch, finding ways to increase efficiency and profitability while maintaining the values and practices that had always defined the Double L. Grace achieved her dream and became one of the first female veterinarians in Montana, earning the respect of even the most skeptical ranchers through her skill and dedication. She never married, finding fulfillment in her career and her family, though she had suitors aplenty. Sarah married a young man named Robert who'd come to the ranch to apprentice in horse training. They built a small house near the main homestead and started their own horse breeding program, which quickly gained renown throughout the state. Through births and deaths, triumphs and setbacks, celebrations and sorrows, Daniel and Willa remained each other's constant. They were in their 50s now, older but still vital, still active in the ranch operations, though they delegated more and more to their capable children. On a warm August day in 1913, exactly 30 years after they'd first met, Willa convinced Daniel to ride out with her to the valley where she'd been roping cattle that morning. It was something they did occasionally, a pilgrimage to where their story had begun. The valley looked much the same as it had 3 decades earlier. The same mountains rose in the distance, the same grass waved in the breeze, the same wide sky arched overhead. But everything was different too, changed by time and their presence. 30 years, Daniel marveled, dismounting and helping Willa down from her horse. 3 decades since I saw you out here and knew my wandering days were over. Best decision you ever made stopping that day, Willa said with a smile. Second best, Daniel corrected. The best decision was asking you to marry me. Or maybe it was saying yes when you asked me to stay for dinner that first night. Actually, every decision that led me to you and kept me with you was the best decision. Willa laughed, the sound bright and joyful. We've had a good life, haven't we? Better than I ever imagined possible when I was young. The best life, Daniel agreed. He pulled her close, and they stood there in the middle of the valley, holding each other. Sometimes I still can't believe how lucky I got. That morning when I rode up and saw you, so capable and beautiful and strong, I didn't dare hope you might feel the same way about me. I fell in love with you almost immediately, Willa confessed. The way you looked at me, the way you treated me as an equal. The way you weren't afraid of hard work or commitment. I tried to be cautious, tried to protect my heart, but it was useless. You had me from let's wrangle life together. Those were good words, Daniel said with satisfaction. I still don't know where they came from. They just seemed right in the moment. They were perfect, Willa assured him. And we have wrangled life together, haven't we? Every day, every challenge, every joy, partners in everything. And we're not done yet, Daniel said firmly. We have years ahead of us still, more grandchildren to spoil, more sunsets to watch, more life to build together. Years and years, Willa agreed, though they both knew nothing was guaranteed. But they'd learned to cherish each day, to find joy in the simple moments, to never take their time together for granted. They stayed in the valley for a while longer, reminiscing and laughing, remembering the younger versions of themselves who'd met here and fallen in love. Then they rode back to the ranch together, side by side as they'd been for 30 years, as they would be for however many years they had left. The Double L continued to thrive through the 1910s and into the 1920s. The ranch now sprawled across thousands of acres, one of the largest and most successful operations in Montana. But it had never lost its heart, the sense of family and partnership that Daniel and Willa had instilled from the beginning. They had 12 grandchildren now, with more on the way, and the ranch was full of life and energy. Sunday dinners were boisterous affairs with 3 generations gathered around an expanded table, talking and laughing and sharing stories. Daniel and Willa presided over these gatherings with joy, seeing their legacy not just in the land they'd built up but in the love and connection that bound their family together. In 1925, they celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary. By now, they were in their early 60s, moving a bit slower but still sharp and engaged. The celebration was even bigger than their 15th anniversary had been, with friends and family coming from all over the state. Thomas Jr., now 41 and the unofficial head of the ranch operations, gave a toast that brought tears to everyone's eyes. "My parents taught us that true success isn't measured in acres or cattle or money," he said. "It's measured in the life you build and the people you build it with." They showed us what real partnership looks like, what it means to face every challenge together and come out stronger for it. "Everything good in my life, everything I am, comes from the example they set." To Daniel and Willa Baker, the best parents anyone could ask for and the best example of love I've ever seen. When it was Daniel's turn to speak, he stood with some difficulty, his joints bothering him more these days, but his voice was strong and clear. 40 years ago, I was a drifting cowboy with no real purpose or direction. Then I saw a beautiful woman roping cattle alone, and everything changed. Willa gave me a home, a family, a reason to put down roots and build something lasting. She's been my partner in every way that matters, and loving her has been the greatest privilege of my life. Here's to 40 more years if we're blessed enough to have them. 40 more years, Willa echoed, standing to kiss her husband while their family and friends cheered. As the decade wore on, Daniel's health began to decline. Nothing dramatic, just the slow wearing down that came with age and a lifetime of hard physical labor. He developed a persistent cough that worried Willa, though he insisted it was nothing. She made him see the doctor in Bozeman who prescribed rest and lighter duties. Daniel chafed at the restrictions, hating feeling useless, but Willa was firm. "You took care of me all these years," she said. "Now it's my turn to take care of you. Let me do this, Daniel. Let me help you the way you've always helped me." So Daniel stepped back from the heaviest ranch work, though he remained involved in planning and management. He spent more time with his grandchildren, teaching them the skills and wisdom he'd accumulated over a lifetime. The children adored him, sensing something special in their grandfather's patient attention and gentle humor. On a crisp October evening in 1928, Daniel and Willa sat on their porch watching the sunset, wrapped in blankets against the chill. They'd been doing this nearly every evening for 45 years now, and it never got old. "Willa," Daniel said quietly, and something in his tone made her turn to look at him. "I need you to know something. If anything happens to me, if this cough is more serious than we think, I need you to know that I've lived the most incredible life. Everything I ever wanted, everything I ever dreamed of, you gave me. You made me happier than I had any right to be." "Don't talk like that," Willa said, fear clutching at her heart. "You're going to be fine. You're just tired." "I am tired," Daniel admitted, "but I'm also realistic. We're not young anymore, Willa, and I want to make sure you know before anything happens how grateful I am for every single day, for every moment, for choosing me and staying with me and building this beautiful life with me." Tears were streaming down Willa's face now. "You chose me too. You stopped that day when you could have ridden on. You saw me and you chose me." "Best decision I ever made," Daniel said softly, reaching for her hand. "The very best." They sat there as the sun set, holding hands, two people who'd loved each other well and built something beautiful together. The ranch spread out before them, golden in the fading light. and inside the house they could hear their grandchildren playing, the sound of life and love and legacy. Daniel's cough did get worse over the winter, and by spring, it was clear that something was seriously wrong. The doctor's diagnosis was grim pneumonia that had settled deep in his lungs, weakened by years of working in harsh conditions. There was little they could do except try to keep him comfortable. Daniel faced his illness with the same quiet courage he'd brought to everything else in his life. He didn't complain or rail against fate, just accepted what was coming with grace. His main concern was for Willa, for making sure she'd be all right without him. "Promise me you'll be happy," he said one afternoon as she sat beside his bed, holding his hand. It was May of 1929, and outside the window the world was green and beautiful, full of life. "Promise me you won't spend your remaining years grieving. We had 46 beautiful years together, Willa. That's more than most people get. Be grateful for what we had, not sad about it ending." "How can I promise that?" Willa asked, her voice breaking. "You're my whole heart, Daniel. You have been since that first day. How do I go on without you?" "The same way you did everything else," Daniel said gently, "with strength and courage and grace. You're the strongest person I've ever known, Willa. You'll be all right. You have our children and grandchildren, you have the ranch, you have the life we built together. I'll always be part of that. I'll always be with you." "It's not enough," Willa whispered. "I want you here beside me. I want more years. I want to grow old together, to meet our great-grandchildren, to watch more sunsets together." "I know," Daniel said, and there were tears in his eyes too. "I want that too, more than anything. But we don't always get what we want. What we do get to control is how we face what comes. And I'm choosing to face this with gratitude. Gratitude for every single day I got to spend with you. Gratitude for our children and grandchildren. Gratitude for this incredible life we wrangled together." He squeezed her hand weakly. "Let's wrangle life together, I said to you all those years ago. And we did, Willa. We really did. We faced everything side by side and we made something beautiful. That doesn't end just because I'm dying. What we built will last. Our children will carry it forward and their children after them. We're part of something bigger than ourselves now." Willa climbed carefully into the bed beside him, nestling against his side as she'd done so many times over their years together. "I love you so much," she whispered. "More than words can say. You made my life beautiful, Daniel Baker. You made everything better just by being in it." "I love you too," Daniel murmured, his arm coming around her. "My darling Willa. My partner, my best friend, my everything. Thank you for saying yes when I asked you to marry me. Thank you for building this life with me. Thank you for every single day." They lay there together as the afternoon faded into evening, and Daniel's breathing gradually grew slower and more labored. Their children came to say goodbye one by one, and then their grandchildren, each person taking a moment to tell Daniel what he'd meant to them. The house was full of quiet weeping, but also gratitude, recognition that they'd been blessed to know and love this good man. As night fell and the stars came out, it was just Willa and Daniel again, together as they'd been for so many years. His eyes opened one last time, focusing on her face with the same love and devotion they'd held since the beginning. "Wrangled life together," he whispered, the words barely audible. "Every day together." "Together," Willa agreed, her tears falling freely now. "Always together, my love, in this life and whatever comes after." Daniel smiled, and then his eyes closed for the last time. His breathing stopped, and Willa felt the exact moment when his spirit left, felt the profound absence where his presence had been. She held him for a long time, crying quietly, saying goodbye to the man who'd been her partner for nearly half a century. The funeral was held on a beautiful May day, with people coming from all over Montana to pay their respects. Daniel Baker had touched many lives, and the church in Dillon was packed to overflowing. Willa sat in the front pew, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, drawing strength from their presence and their love. Thomas Jr. gave the eulogy, speaking about his father's integrity, his work ethic, his devotion to family. "My father taught me that success isn't about what you achieve, but about who you become and how you treat people," he said. "He showed me what it means to be a good man, a good husband, a good father. He loved my mother with a devotion that never wavered, never faltered, from the day they met until the day he died. That kind of love, that kind of partnership, is rare and precious. We were blessed to witness it." After the service, they buried Daniel on a hill overlooking the ranch, with a simple headstone that read Daniel Baker, beloved husband, father, grandfather. He wrangled life well. Willa visited the grave every day at first, sitting on the grass and talking to Daniel as if he could hear her. She told him about the ranch operations, about the grandchildren, about the small moments of beauty she found in each day. It comforted her to speak to him, to maintain that connection even though he was gone. The grief was crushing at times, the absence of Daniel a constant ache in her chest. But Willa was strong, just as he'd always said, and she honored his memory by continuing to live, to engage with life, to be present for her family. She knew that's what he would have wanted. She remained active in ranch management, though Thomas Jr. handled most of the day-to-day operations now. She spent time with her grandchildren, teaching them the same skills Daniel had taught their parents. She found joy in small things: the feel of the sun on her face, the sound of horses in the pasture, the laughter of children playing. 3 years after Daniel's death, Willa was sitting on her porch one evening when she felt a presence beside her. Not literally, she wasn't given to flights of fancy, but rather a sense of Daniel near her, a feeling of peace and rightness. And she realized something important in that moment. He wasn't truly gone. He lived on in their children, who'd inherited his integrity and kindness. He lived on in the ranch they'd built together, in every fence post and barn and acre of land. He lived on in her heart, in her memories, in the way he'd shaped her life and made her better. They'd wrangled life together for 46 years, and that didn't end just because one of them had died. The partnership they'd forged was eternal, transcending death itself. She would carry him with her for the rest of her days, until they were reunited in whatever came after this life. Willa lived for 12 more years, dying peacefully in her sleep in 1941 at the age of 80. She was buried beside Daniel on the hill, their graves side by side, overlooking the ranch they'd built together. Her headstone read Willa Lancaster Baker, beloved wife, mother, grandmother. She wrangled life well. The Double L Ranch continued to thrive under Thomas Jr. and his siblings, and then under their children, and then their children's children. It became a Montana institution, a place where family values and hard work were still paramount, where partnership and mutual respect were the foundation of everything. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the sun was setting and the wind whispered through the grass, workers on the ranch swore they could feel something special in the air. A presence, maybe 2 presences, watching over the land with love and pride. The spirits of Daniel and Willa Baker, still together after all these years, still partners, still wrangling life together in whatever form existence took after death. Their story became family legend, told and retold to each new generation. The tale of how a drifting cowboy met a rancher's daughter roping cattle alone, and how he'd asked her to wrangle life together, and how they'd built something beautiful and lasting out of love and partnership and hard work. It was a story that reminded each generation what truly mattered: family, love, dedication, and facing life's challenges together. The ranch still stands today, a testament to what two people can build when they find each other against all odds and commit to facing every day side by side. The house where Willa and Daniel raised their children has been preserved, and visitors can still see the porch where they sat together watching sunsets for over 4 decades. The valley where they first met is still called Baker's Valley by locals, and the hill where they're buried is a peaceful spot where family members often come to think and remember. But their true legacy isn't in buildings or land, or even in the prosperous ranch that bears their name. Their legacy is in the love they shared and the example they set. They showed everyone who knew them what real partnership looks like, what it means to truly wrangle life together. They proved that when you find the right person and commit to working together through everything life brings, you can build something that outlasts death itself. Their love story, which began with a chance meeting in a Montana valley in 1883, continues to inspire and guide their descendants even now. A reminder that the best things in life are built one day at a time, with patience and love and unwavering commitment to the person you choose to stand beside. Daniel and Willa Baker wrangled life together, and in doing so, they created something eternal.